Hey, we're live.
We're live. Hey, Chris, why don't you start this time?
I was going to say, Marcus Boyd in Lockahachie, Florida. How the hell are you, Marcus?
Marcus,
I bet
yeah.
It's warmer there than it is here.
I thought you were going to say calling Rick Beyer in Chicago.
Oh, yeah, but that was just the lead-in. So you want me to say that?
I do.
Okay, calling Rick Beyer in Chicago.
I'm here calling Chris Anderson in London.
I'm here.
Oh, excellent.
How are things in Chicago?
Cold. You could say, how cold is it? But it's very cold. It's not like sunny Toronto, which is apparently warmer. Maybe John can tell us how cold it is in Toronto. It was about 0 Fahrenheit here today. And John's looking forward to an interview about an emperor I've never heard of. You know, we should say we are talking about ancient Rome today, and the History Happy Hour Empire, Chris.
Yes.
It is larger than the Roman Empire.
It is.
I mean, it extends from California. We have listeners, viewers there to Spain and France. So, and we're like the twin consuls of the History Happy Hour Empire.
You'd look good in purple, Rick.
I was surprised that you didn't wear a toga today. So
they don't. Terry cloth doesn't come that big.
I see. Very, very tough for you.
It is.
We'll wait a minute for everybody to join us, and I want to remind people that we're here talking about history every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours Facebook and YouTube pages, and that all of our broadcasts, that is to say all 45 of the History Happy Hours that have happened so far, are available on the History Happy Hour webpage. That you could do almost a 2-day binge and really get your History Happy Hour.
So if you didn't pay your Netflix bill and they've cut you off, you can binge.
History Happy Hour is here for you. Yeah. So we're building up a few viewers here, Chris. So you think we're ready to get going?
I think we are.
All right, let's have at it.
The bar is open.
Yes, and welcome everyone to the Super Bowl pregame edition of History Happy Hour. I'm here with color commentator Chris Anderson. Chris, we have a historic matchup today. Praetorian Guard, Roman soldiers, emperors, all sorts of fascinating stuff. What do you think?
I want to know what the halftime show is.
Yeah, our halftime show, that is unbooked as of yet. But listen, our show today has almost nothing to do with the Super Bowl, but we'll try to find a connection before the hour is through.
No.
And we're going to travel back in time further than we ever have on this program. So do you have your time machine ready, Chris Anderson?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So we're going to turn the clock back about 1,800 years to visit the Roman Empire of the 2nd century. And our tour guide for this trip is going to be Simon Elliot. He's a historian and archaeologist, historian, I mentioned that one already, author, former editor at Jane's Defense Weekly, a PhD in archaeology, and a trustee of the Council for British Archeology, which all sounds super, super impressive, I think actually is. And he is the author of 9 books, including the one we are talking about today, Pertinax, the son of a slave who became Emperor of Rome. So we want to welcome Simon Elliot. Simon, welcome from Kent,
hey guys.
England.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey Simon, with that introduction, head of all this British archaeology thing, shouldn't you be wearing tweed or something? I don't know.
Well, I can go and get it, Chris. Shall I go and get it? Or a deer stalker.
Yes, exactly.
A pipe would do.
Actually, what I was going to volunteer to do, shall I read the title of this as Russell Crowe would have read it in Gladiator?
Oh, absolutely.
So we'll go, Pertinax, the son of a slave who became the Emperor of Rome. There you go.
Oh, very good.
That is awesome. And worth mentioning, as I was going to mention anyway, that this story actually takes place just at about the same time as the movie Gladiator, or right after it, starting about 5 minutes later, we'd say. During and after.
Well, firstly, Rick, I'm going to give you your Super Bowl link. Your Super Bowl link is very straightforward. It's the Colosseum, because one of the key characters in the story of this amazing individual, Pertinax, is Commodus, played by Joaquin Phoenix in the movie Gladiator. Commodus was famous in the Roman world as the emperor who absolutely loved taking part in gladiatorial combat, albeit his opponents were drugged or injured in some way. And if he was in beast hunts, they were drugged as well, clearly because he's the emperor. But he did take part in gladiatorial combats in the Colosseum. Colosseum, Super Bowl. There's your link. Boom.
So it's sort of as if, where am I going here? If Joe Biden was coming in as quarterback instead of Tom Brady.
Yes.
No, it's nothing like that.
Oh, boy, you lost me there, man. Just,
I think we're all gonna... So I have long been interested in ancient Rome, and I have visited Roman ruins in such places as Rome. I've been in the UK, in Bath. When I was 14 years old, I was with my school group from Birmingham and snuck away to the pub from the ruins in Bath and had my first Guinness stout, so that's why archaeology always has a positive memory for me. Fascinated by stories of all sorts of figures like Caesar and Nero and Constantine, and I got to tell you, Simon, never until your book had I even heard of Pertinax. So tell me, who is he and why did you want to write about him?
Well, the first thing is it's one of those amazing stories in history where it's firstly an honor almost to be able to bring this character back to the attention of the world, because in the Roman world, Pertinax was as famous as Julius Caesar or Augustus. He's this everyman figure who truly was the son of a former slave who ended up, through hard work, through being very Roman, actually, through grit and determination, becoming the Roman emperor. And then he was only the emperor for 3 months. He was the first of the emperors of the year of the 5 emperors in AD 193. And he stood up to the Praetorian Guard, and eventually they assassinated him because he wanted to style himself as being a worthy philosopher emperor in the style of sort of Marcus Aurelius. His father lived in Liguria, which is north western Italy, and he used to be a slave. He was manumitted and freed. When he was freed, he ended up like a number of slaves, if they were lucky enough to be a very successful businessman, and that enabled his son Pertinax, Publius Helvius Pertinax, to give him his full name, to receive a good education. Now, bizarrely, Pertinax, being raised in a fairly wealthy household later in, let's say, his pre-teens, decided once he graduated from school at the age of 16 that he wasn't going to join the army, he wasn't going to do this or that. He wanted to become a teacher. So he was a teacher until his mid-30s.
Wow.
And then he had this Damascene conversion moment where he decided he was going to join the military. Who knew? And through the help of a family patron, joined the Roman military. Then, just through happened to serve in the latter half of the 2nd century AD, which is the time when the Roman Empire is at the height of its power. He served everywhere. He served on all the major battlefields. He served against the Parthians, who were the Persians, in the east. He served in Britain twice, including being based in York, fought in Scotland. Yes, great. That's a great map, actually. So if we'll start him off in northwestern Italy, and then we'll move him across to Syria, and then we'll move him up to Britain on top left, then move him really top left to the line of Hadrian's Wall. He was based at Housestead, fought on Hadrian's Wall for a while, as well as York, fought in Scotland. Then he came back to the Danube and served in what is now modern Romania and Bulgaria, and was the captain of a fleet of ships. Then he served in Rome, in charge of the grain supply in Rome. Remember, this is a guy who didn't start his proper career till his mid-30s, when all of his contemporaries had started their similar careers 15 years earlier. So he's playing catch-up from the very beginning of this step up in his mid-30s. Then goes to become the admiral in charge of the Roman fleet on the Rhine. Then you get the gladiator moment, as in the movie, because in Gladiator, if I was to choose any of the individuals in Gladiator to be Pertinax, it would probably be the Derek Jacobi figure, who's the very worthy individual who wants to keep sort of Roman values high. And Pertinax becomes a very successful general, fighting alongside the general who Russell Crowe plays, Maximus, who's a real figure. So Pertinax fought alongside him in real life, and then later becomes the governor in the key frontier provinces of the Roman Empire. So the guy in charge just below the level of the emperor. So he's in Syria, he's on the Danube again, he's in North Africa, then serves in Britain again as the governor. And while he's in Britain as the governor, the legions rebel and try and kill him. And he survives through the skin of his teeth. His guards are...
You got to stop for a minute here, Simon.
I'm nearly finished. Rick, I'm nearly finished. I'm nearly finished.
Chris a chance to ask a question.
No, I'm nearly finished. So he serves in Britain, then he's in Rome next as the praetorian, is the mayor, the mayor of Rome, when the Emperor Commodus dies and he gets appointed emperor. That's the story.
No, but you're
whatever.
So, Chris, what are you going to ask about now? He said it all.
Well, wait. One of the questions I had.
There's Pertinax. There's Pertinax.
One of the questions I had, Simon, and I think maybe it would help some of our viewers, is if you could talk a little bit about kind of the nature of slavery in Rome, because I mean, most of our references are to more modern slavery, say, in America before the Civil War, and that's kind of slavery. You can be a black person, you can gain your freedom and be considered a free man, but you're still black, and you still face those prejudices as you go through life. So is Pertinax's father and family, are they facing the same kind of prohibitions, or once you're a free man, is that okay, you can go on from there? I mean, it just seems remarkable to me, given his career.
It's a great question. So the first thing to understand is the nature, the structure of Roman society. So in Roman society, you have at the bottom, you have slaves, okay? And let's say in Italy, that's probably no more than 25% of the population at the very most, and going through to being only 1 in 10 in somewhere like Egypt. Then you have freed men, who are men and women who are freed slaves. So slave, freed man. Then you have a free man, who's somebody who has never been a slave. Then above that, you have 3 classes of aristocrats. You have the curial class, who are your merchants, your artisans. Then you have the equestrian class, and finally the senatorial class, who are the patricians. Anybody below the level of senator is a plebeian. Okay, that's where the word plebs comes from. So if we go back down towards, as the Romans would see at the bottom of society, the slaves are the slaves. You can be manumitted through a variety of methods. You can earn money as a slave in Rome, so you could buy your freedom. You could perform good service and be freed by your master, or you could be freed in your master's will. And once you're freed, you're a freed man. A freed man can do most things that every other member of Roman society can do, except hold a number of key public offices. But everything else you can do. And what you tend to find is a lot of freed slaves, freed men, celebrate their lives because they can't hold very important public office through monuments, so through huge mausolea, through funding the building of public buildings and that kind of thing.
Okay. So it's sort of like you putting their name on buildings as opposed to being able to be a consul or be a senator.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the distinction between Pertinax and his father. His father was called Helvius Successus, and we don't know how. We don't know where he came from, so we don't know how he got to northwestern Italy. He could have come from anywhere in the Roman Empire as a slave. He could have been captured north of the Rhine or Danube. He could have been captured in the east. We don't know, but we find him when his son is born in northwestern Italy, in Liguria, in the Po Valley, making money as a freed slave, because he turns out to be a very, very good businessman. And so his son, probably in his later pre-teens and his teens, effectively gets the finest education that you could give a child in the Roman Empire, and this is being paid for by a freed slave. To be clear, I'm not saying slavery is good. It is clearly awful. However, in the Roman Empire, there are certain ways out of it if you are lucky, and if you find your way out of it, you can make a success of your life as we would see it today.
Right. So then Pertinax, his neighbors wouldn't have said, "Oh, look at him. He's a son of a slave. He's not quite, there's not that stigma attached to him, or is there?" And
I think that's actually, Chris, that's again a really brilliant question. Actually,
yeah, that's Chris's department, is the good questions. That's his job. I have a different job. That's his job.
Well, I think my instincts are, well, look at, you can see we can answer your question through the prism of what happened in his later life. One of the reasons I think he was successful later, when he was made a senator much later in life, is because he wasn't taken seriously. He basically submarined below everybody else, and no one took him seriously until it was too late, and he was the emperor. because he wasn't as wealthy as anybody else. Everybody would have known he was the son of a slave.
Right.
In his later life, he would have been acknowledged as a very, very, very brave soldier and an exponentially good military leader who was very, very popular with the public. The public nicknamed the most famous racehorse in Rome at the beginning of the AD 190s Pertinax, because he was their favorite and the racehorse was their favorite. And a lot of that is because the people who were his rivals just didn't take him seriously. Now, you can see that written in his early life, almost certainly. Well, he clearly, within his social circle and his father's social circle, would have been known as the son of a slave. But it wasn't the blot on the copybook that would stop him achieving in life.
There's a follow-up on that comes from one of our viewers, Nancy, who asks, how did a freed man rise in society? And I would sort of build on this question. So not is he the son of a former slave, as you've mentioned, he's somebody who gets a very late start in the quest for public office, the cursus honorum, as it's called in Rome, the sort of the rising on the path to power there. And you've documented sort of the stops on the road, but how was that able to happen? And I know some of it might be conjecture. Was there helping hands along the way? Is he an extraordinarily smart man? Is he extraordinarily pertinacious man, as his name might suggest?
That's where his name comes from. His father named him Pertinacious because he himself, his father, was known as a pertinacious man. So his father named his son after his own trait, which is this very Roman sense of grit, this determination to achieve. You set your mind to something, and no matter what the adversity, you keep going and keep going and keep going. And to answer the questions directly, and again, they're great questions.
But this one was from Nancy, so that's also her job, is to do great questions also.
Thank you very much for your great question, Nancy. I would say that if you are a free, two answers. Firstly, if you're a freed slave and you bought your freedom, then you've got money because you keep the money, and you're talking about maybe the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of pounds today. So clearly, he's a very, very, very successful person in his own right, even as a slave, his father. But also, interestingly, in the chapter in the book where I talk about slavery, the second half of the chapter talks about patronage, which you touched on, Rick. Patronage is really, really important here in the Roman world, because if the family clearly had a wealthy patron early in Pertinex's life who looked after the family, including his father. And it's this patron, actually, who in his mid-30s is the person who arranges for Pertinax to join the military. This individual will clearly have been there for the last 10 or 20 years, making sure that at every step of the way that Pertinax's family were looked after. So there was a road to being successful already there, one through money and two through patronage. It's very normal. If you go to Pompeii or Herculaneum, any of the townhouses, you'll notice outside the townhouse, onto the pavement, overlooking the street, there'll be a bench, stone bench. The bench is there for the people who are seeking patronage to sit on in the morning, waiting to be called into the tabulinium in the townhouse for the patron to have a chat with them, find out what they wanted, and then he tell them, this is the bit that people often miss, what he wants in return, because it's a two-way street.
That's why that bench is out in front of your apartment building, Rick, right?
Yes, exactly. So, Chris, tell me what you want anytime you want to. I know it's Chris's turn to ask, but I forgot something, and no one has noticed it, so I'm lucky I can jump in. I forgot to ask you, Chris, what your cocktail is today.
Well, as comes no surprise, celebrating Scotland's victory over England in rugby, a nice single malt.
Oh, rugby. That's the one where they can pick up the ball, right?
And they hit each other and they don't have to wear pads.
Oh, how lovely. How lovely. Simon, are you with us today? Are drinking, or are you being a sober, are you the designated driver?
I'm designated driver. I've got a Diet Coke.
Designated historian.
Only because I actually do want to watch the Super Bowl tonight, by the way.
Designated historian. Oh, it's Super Bowl. And I want to say that I not only am I drinking Italian wine, but I think that's the Colosseum on the bottle.
It is. Well, right? It's certainly an arena anyway. Fantastic.
something close to that. All right, enough.
Are you done now?
Enough of me for the moment.
Okay,
See, now
thank
you
you.
understand a little bit about my job, Simon. If Chris's is to ask good questions, mine is to.
So
drink.
Simon Pertinax he's in his classroom one day. One of the kids throws an eraser at him. He throws up his hands and said, "I'm done with this. I've had enough of you kids. I'm going to join the army." He's coming late in life to this, and there's no West Point in ancient Rome. So, how does he become a soldier, and what sort of training does he undergo to all of a sudden be leading other Roman soldiers?
Well, he gets off on the wrong foot. So
That'll do it.
number one, he's very late in life anyway. Number two, he wants to become a centurion, actually, in a legion. So in the Roman military of this phase of the empire, you've got two principal kinds of soldier. You've got the legionary, who are the elite warriors of the ancient world, I would argue. And you've got auxiliaries, who are still very good soldiers, but not quite as good as the legionaries. The legionaries are the guys that are on the front of all the books, wearing their banded iron armor, the lorica segmentata, their Gallic helmets, and their scutum shields, and their pilums. So Pertinax wants to be one of these guys. He wants to be an officer in a legion. He wants to be a centurion. Now, most people think of centurion as an NCO, but a centurion's not. A centurion actually can be anything from an NCO all the way up to a very senior officer. So he wants to be a centurion in the Roman legion, and he doesn't get the gig because his patron clearly doesn't have the clout to go the whole hog. So instead, he gets an appointment. Bear in mind, this guy, you're almost going from one day teaching with a whiteboard today to the following day being on the front line in Syria.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Because the unit he gets appointed to, which shows how cosmopolitan the Roman Empire is actually, is a Gallic auxiliary cavalry unit. So he wants to be a legionary, a foot soldier in the legions, and he ends up being a cavalry officer as an auxiliary, and he gets posted
with men from Gaul. When you say Gallic, you mean from what is now France, from Gaul.
Yeah, the unit was recruited in Gaul. We actually do have the name of the unit. It was recruited in Gaul. One of the key things about Pertinax's life is up to about 2/3 of the way along in his career, he erected a memorial to his success called the Brill Inscription, which lists all the appointments he had. So we actually know most of his appointments through the way that he would have starred it. So he joins this unit of Gallic cavalry, who, by the way, were headhunters. Gallic and German cavalry in the Roman military tended to be headhunters because of their forebears were headhunters.
So they helped people find jobs, or not that kind of headhunter?
Very special jobs.
Very special jobs.
Very special jobs where you basically get sent to Hades. So,
travel included. Yeah.
So he gets appointed, but clearly they're in the east, in Syria, and he's not. So he has to travel to join them. So he uses the Roman trunk road network to get to his unit in Syria, and he arrives in Antioch, modern Antakya, on the border between Turkey and Syria today, and presents his credentials to the governor, who's the big guy. The governor is the emperor's representative, and it turns out he's not got the paperwork to actually have used the trunk roads. So he turns up effectively illegally in front of the governor. So the governor, listen, just really, I think this is amazing detail, which is in the primary sources, and it's cross-referenced 3 times in the primary sources. The governor, to punish him, makes him walk on foot from the Mediterranean coast of Syria to what is effectively the modern border of Syria and Iraq to join his unit. So that's how his career begins. So he starts late and then does it completely the wrong way. But here's the kicker. It turns out he's a natural. So he fights in his first war. Is called the Roman Parthian War from AD 161 to 165. Parthia is effectively modern eastern Syria and Iraq. Later becomes the Sassanid Persian Empire. And it's the nearest thing the Romans have got at this time to what we would call today a symmetrical enemy. So an opponent who can give the Romans a run for their money. Remember Crassus, famously killed at the Battle of Carrhae by the Parthians. But he makes his name. He proves the natural.
Well, that's kind of, following up on Chris's question, that is kind of hard, I think, for us today to imagine. I am over 35, although I know I don't look it. But I can't imagine when I was 35 and I was working as a creative director at an ad agency that I decided one day that I'm going to be a soldier, and a couple of weeks later I'm leading a U.S. Army regiment someplace and doing a great job. I mean, I would imagine that I would completely fail and be immediately killed by the enemy or my own men. So how? I mean, again, I know that the information's probably not there, but how do you think he pulls that off? I mean, is it enough just to say he's a natural? I mean, or is there more sort of broad training of people in Rome at this time to sort of prepare them for this?
Well, clearly the Roman military were exceptionally well trained, but even so he would have had very good training. He would not have been put in charge of a unit of men. And bear in mind, these are seasoned warriors. They're headhunters. They basically chop the heads off their opponents when they defeat them. So these are tough guys. So Pertinax rocks up. And again, I'm just going to show you the book. I'm not plugging the book now. I'm just showing you. I want you to look at his features, right? So that is a rugged guy. Okay, he's a tough guy. This is later in life when he's in his early 60s. So even as a younger man, this is going to be a tough. That's a great image. Tough guy. By the way, as an aside, guys, do you know why you so often see a Medusa on the front of Roman armor?
No.
Oh, no.
Because in the Roman world, there was very little understanding of public health. They knew things were bad for you, but they didn't know why. And one of the things they believed was that you could use the evil eye, i.e. look at somebody, to curse somebody or infect them with something just by looking at them with evil intent. So to deflect it, what you deploy are countermeasures, chaff and flares. And the chaff and flares of the Roman world with the evil eye are other eyes. And what does a Medusa have? A Medusa has a head full of snakes with loads and loads of eyes. So very often you find on the front of very fine Roman armor, they have a Medusa's head to basically divert to the evil eye of your opponent. But that guy there is a tough guy, right? And clearly he made a huge impression. He must have been brave. He must have been a good leader of men in battle. He must have had something about him which his superiors picked up on, because his next appointment goes from one hotspot in the empire to the other. And I'll give you an example. The Roman poet Horace, writing around the turn of the 1st century BC, 1st century AD, talking about Augustus, says, Augustus will only be a god if he defeats the pesky Parthians and the pesky Britons. And of course, Augustus didn't. So Pertinax goes from defeating the pesky Parthians to defeating the pesky or fighting the pesky Britons within probably 2 years of him signing up.
And he does become a god. So there you go. He is deified after his death.
Now, Simon, are there? And this is going to tie in. We've been getting some questions about sources, but is there anything in the sources? Is there any description of him as of a man saying, he's impetuous, he's brave, he's smart, he's big, he's tall, or is it this bust we have of him and your kind of analysis of the primary sources that are giving us what we know about him?
The word that comes out over and over and over and over again when the primary sources talk about him is that he is worthy. So the reason why the Romans loved him, and the reason why anybody looking at how to be a good ruler in subsequent generations likes Pertinax as an example, is because he is genuinely one of these worthy figures of history that's achieved what he's achieved through grit and determination. And he clearly has lucky breaks, but he knows how to make the most of them. That's one of the key things you find with successful people in history. They know when they've been lucky and they know how to make use of the luck. Well, he's clearly one of them, but he's worthy. And that's a great way to segue into the sourcing as well. So like most of the emperors of this period, the key sources are going to be Dio, who's okay as a Roman historian, Herodian, who is notoriously flaky, and then the anonymous Historia Augusta. But between the three of them, and then later Latin sources, which reference works which have now been lost, you can produce a fairly reasonable career plan for Pertinax, especially his later life, because in the book, the thing that I found the most fun was to talk about the last 2 or 3 years of his life, because it almost becomes like a sort of a historical soap opera almost, because you see him starting to play at the very top with the very mad and bad Commodus. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus, the portrayal, not the history, but the portrayal, I think is very accurate. I think he genuinely was the real deal, mad and bad Commodus. To the extent where, when Marcus Aurelius died in AD 180, he left about 40 aristocrats who were to be mentors for Commodus. And by the time Commodus is assassinated on New Year's Eve AD 192, literally the only one left is Pertinex.
Well, and I want to get to that, and I'm sure Chris does too, to the last couple of years, but I want to ask a question before that. There is a movie, not Gladiator, there is a movie called A Million Ways to Die in the West. And reading your book, it struck me that there's a million ways to die as a high-ranking Roman official. It's a really murderous time. You can be murdered by your own legions, a rebellious uprising, neighboring tribes, orders from Rome, poisoned by your wife, your girlfriend, your sister-in-law. It's not like being the head of the FDA, let's say, or head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff these days. Yeah, I don't think it's like that. It's a pretty high-wire life these guys lead, and Pertinax has his own episode, which you mentioned, but you can feel free to describe it in a little more detail, well before he's emperor.
You can, in actual fact, I mean, all of that is absolutely true. In fits and starts, so you'll have a period of 10, 20 years of relative peace, and then a turmoil of changeover of the emperor or the advisors to the emperor. Very often it's actually the advisors to the emperor who are causing the problems. The only time you have it, the whole thing going on for decades, is in the crisis of the 3rd century from AD 235, when Alexander Severus, who's the last of the Severan emperors, is assassinated, to Diocletian becoming the emperor in AD 284. But before that, it's in fits and starts. And clearly there's a big fit and start around the time of Commodus' assassination. If you're in Rome, at least you can see it coming, okay? Imagine what it must be like, and this is relevant to Pertinax, imagine what it must be like in the provinces. Let's say you're in a far-flung province like Britain, and let's say you're a noble family and there's a usurpation takes place in Rome that you don't know about. And word reaches your family in the Medway Valley where I live, or north of the River Thames where you are, Chris, and we're in our fine villas. Well, I'm in my hovel on the River Medway. Chris, you're in your huge country villa estate, and word reaches you that the emperor is dead. Long live the new guy. Who are you going to back? Because it may be the following day word arrives to say the new guy's also dead. Who are you going to back? And so on and so forth.
Check my vineyards.
And that's a good idea, actually. I think I'll come and be your bailiff. The thing to remember there is that there's a direct correlation between Roman coin hoards and these changes taking place, especially in Britain and the Northwest. You tend to find coin hoards appear when there's a changeover and people are fearful of backing the wrong guy. So they'll bury their portable wealth so that if the existing guy survives, they can go back to it, and if not, they can melt it. Now, the fact that the coin hoards still exist today means they did back the wrong horse, because they didn't go back to get there. And Pertinax is relevant here as well. There's a beautiful Roman villa, which you may know, Chris, in Western Kent, called Lullingston, which is very fine. It's famous because it's got amazing scenes of early Christian worship. But before that, it was famous for also having a nymphaeum, so a sort of a mythological place of worship. And it's so fine, it's thought to have been the summer residence for the Roman governors of Britain. Now remember, Pertinax was the governor of Britain in AD 185 to 186, yeah? When Lullingston was excavated, they found 2 buried, defaced heads from statues in one of the basements, bricked up. So not only were they defaced, they were bricked up to hide them. And it turns out the statues were of Pertinax and his father. So either at the time he was governor, or remember the legions tried to kill him, or later when he was the emperor, when the Praetorian Guard did kill him, either of those occasions could have been the reason why whoever was living there thought, hold on, better just make sure I'm not backing the wrong guy here. Let's go. And also the way they actually defaced the statues, it was really crap, if I may say so, because all they did was knock the nose off. They didn't knock anything else off. They didn't chip anything off. They just knocked the nose off, bricked it up, forgot about it and they're now in the British Museum. The beauty is they're so unpresupposing when you're walking around the British Museum. You'll go around and say, oh, that's interesting, and carry on. and yet this is one of the most important figures who actually existed in British history, actually.
And here's the thing. I'm going to bet that the people who did this, they kept the noses in a drawer.
Just in case.
Right? And they had a little mortar. Oh, Pertinax wasn't killed. And you're putting the nose back on, right?
And then they have guests who come to their house. Let's say the noses are in the spare room in a desk, and the guest opens the desk and goes, "That's really weird.
Yeah.
This guy collects noses."
If you put this scene in the next movie you write, Simon, about Pertinax, I am suing your pants off.
I've got to tell you, I've got to tell you guys. Actually, this is the first book I've written where I've actually had Hollywood in touch with me to talk about the film rights.
Best of luck to you.
So, and the interesting thing is, you mentioned it at the very, very start of the conversation, Rick, that Pertinax is that his story is directly linked to the story of Gladiator, because, of course, when Commodus dies, the person who is the emperor after Commodus. So, if you'd have gone on 5 more minutes after Russell Crowe died at the end of Gladiator, the guy who becomes the emperor is Pertinax.
Right.
So Simon, we talked a little bit about his military career, his upbringing. But one of the things that is also remarkable about him is he's clearly a very competent soldier, but he's also a pretty competent administrator. Can you talk a little bit about some of these government positions he has before he becomes emperor?
Well, the first posting that he has in a civilian postings, between being a squadron commander on the Danube and the admiral of the fleet on the Rhine. So in between those, that's a very big career step. Okay, that's huge. So the role he has in between them has got to be a big gig, because he's got to really prove his worth. To become the admiral of a Roman fleet, you get appointed by the emperor, which means whichever gig he had between the two, he actually attracted the attention of the emperor. And it looks like the gig he had was to be the guy in charge of the Cura Annona, which is the grain supply of Rome. So remember, in ancient Rome, the citizens had this free grain dole, which was vital to the city being peaceable and quiet and everybody behaving, because if they didn't get the free food, they'd be rioting in the streets, literally rioting in the streets. So to be the guy in charge of the Cura Annona grain supply was a huge job. And he did it. And again, this is the amazing thing. Probably only a decade, 12 years after he just immediately finished being a teacher. You know, it's an absolutely astonishing career path. And yet, having tested it to breaking point, it's all, as far as I can see, true.
That's amazing. And are there any sources? Has anything that you come across that, of just Romans anywhere talking about this guy Pertinax? He's everywhere. I mean, he must have been famous even then as this guy who's he's like a universal soldier. He's an administrator. He's all over the place.
And yet, again, it's almost like he disappears from history, doesn't he? At the end, if you go through to, if you were living in the Western Empire in 476, when the Western Empire fell, and you were a Roman citizen, you'd have known the name Pertinax. If you were living in the Eastern Empire all the way through to AD 1453, with the final sack of Constantinople, you'd have known the name Pertinax. If you had any Roman lineage in terms of history, you'd have known the name. But once you go beyond that period, it's one of the names that drops off history. It's occasionally referenced. So the founding fathers actually in the States referenced Pertinax as somebody almost too worthy, actually, because he was so worthy he ended up being assassinated. So they were trying to learn from his mistake, quite a crucial mistake, because it cost him his life. But but other than that, it's just one of these figures that drops off from history. And until I came across the guy writing my biography of Septimius Severus, which is through the prism of Severus's campaigns in Scotland, which, by the way, were the largest ever military campaigning forces ever deployed in Britain, 50,000 men. And Pertinax came to me through that research because Pertinax was the mentor of Severus. So when Severus becomes the legate of Legio III Scythica in Syria, the governor of Syria at the time is Pertinax. When Severus becomes the governor of his first province, Gallia Lugdunensis, which is the middle bit of Gaul. The governor of the frontier province across the Channel in Britain is Pertinax. And of course, it's Severus, and we'll talk about it later, I dare say, who then descends like an avenging angel on Rome and the Senate after Pertinax's assassination, eventually becoming the emperor at the end of AD 193. And he's the guy who deifies Pertinax.
You know, I was planning, and I am still planning, on taking us to the night that Pertinax finds out that they want him to be emperor, which is a great story all by itself. But one of our viewers, Xavier, puts up a quick question here, maybe worthy of a quick answer. How did the Roman Empire survive some of these emperors? Because Pertinax was a good one. Commodus was a bad one. There were other bad ones too. And yet, how did they manage to do century after century of hanging on?
If we were to look at what's happened in modern politics, whatever one's views on both sides of the Atlantic in the last 5 or 6 years, you could take the view that providing you have a decent administrative structure, which I think in the UK and the US we do, then you're fit to survive the most turbulent of times. That's certainly the case in Rome, because you could pick. I could talk all night about the mad and bad emperors. Nero, mad. Caracalla, bad. Commodus, mad and bad, and anything in between. Look at the crisis of the 3rd century, when you have multiple usurpations all the time. You know, Roman Britain was most famous in the Roman Empire for being the place where people try to take the purple. Especially in the later empire, the only one who succeeded was one of the most important Roman emperors, Constantine, but many tried it, and yet the system survived. And it took a structural failure of such proportions towards the end of the 5th century that nothing could have survived it to bring down the empire in the West. But even then, the empire in the East survived for another 1,000 years. So the system worked, and it could survive the mad, the bad, and the mad and the bad.
And hopefully there were none that were sad, because that would have been tough to survive. Okay.
Oh.
But let's go to because let's not miss out on the good stuff here. Let's go to the night that our man Pertinax finds out that the power brokers here want him to be emperor. What happens? And the great scene in the bedroom, which is just a great scene.
I'm going to read you the quote actually from Herodian. Basically, New Year's Eve, AD 192, AD 193. Commodus is assassinated, and he's assassinated by a troika featuring the praetorian prefect Laetus, the court chamberlain Eclectus, and his own mistress Marcia. 3 of the most powerful people actually in Rome at the time, and they've decided they had enough of Commodus because he's basically taking everything to rack and ruin. He's bankrupted the imperial treasury, that's a fact. So they have to get rid of him. He's got to go. So they try and poison him, and it's New Year's Eve, and there's no praetorian guards around. Everyone's having a good time. But so's Commodus. He's been having a good time, drinking a lot, and then he's poisoned with some sweetmeats by Marcia. And just at the point he eats the sweetmeats, he goes and has a bath. A Roman bath, and he sweats the poison out. So instead of dying, he just is sick. But these are really well organized assassins, because they have a wrestler. It's
always good to have a backup plan.
and their backup plan is to have a wrestler. They've got a wrestler ready.
We've all got
as you would, yeah.
Yeah. So the wrestler strangles Commodus, and he's dead. So they're casting around, who should we have to steady the ship? This is, by the way, where the JFK quote in the Times article comes from, because people looked at Pertinax as being a source of hope to go away from the bad times to the good times. So they cast around, who should they go for? They go for the praetorian. They go for the city mayor, the urban prefect, who's Pertinax. Whether he was in on the plot or not, we don't know. I probably don't think he was. Certainly if you look at the responses. So the court chamberlain and the praetorian prefect go to Pertinax's house, probably about a quarter of a mile from the Forum Romanum, middle of the night, revelry all around, people boozing, it's New Year's Eve. If the Romans could have had fireworks, they'd have had fireworks. They didn't, but that's the kind of gig we're talking about. Every revelry you can imagine. They knock on his door, and his bailiff answers the door, and basically everybody thinks that they're there to assassinate Pertinax. And Herodian puts these words in Pertinax's mouth as the court chamberlain and the praetorian prefect go and see him in the middle of the night out of the blue. Quote from Herodian: "For a long time now, I have been waiting for my life to end in this fashion. I was surprised that Commodus was so slow to act against me, the sole survivor of the advisors of his father who appointed him. Why do you delay? You will be carrying out your orders. I will be relieved from degrading hope and constant fear." So he thinks he's going to get whacked, basically. And having just watched the new cut of The Godfather Part 3, it's basically like the end of The Godfather Part 3. So Latus, the Praetorian prefect, responds thus: "Please stop saying these things, unworthy of you and your past conduct. Our visit does not concern your death, but our safety and the safety of the Roman Empire. The tyrant is dead, victim of a fate he richly deserved. What he planned to do to us, we have done to him. We have come to place the empire in your hands, aware that you are not only the most distinguished senator because of your moderate life," there you go, "and have won reverence for your greatness and the dignity of your years, but also enjoy the love and the esteem of the people." There you go. So he's made the emperor. Now, the next bit is my favorite piece of the whole story. And one of the things I'm really fortunate to do is to be a guide lecturer for a tour company called Andante Travels in the Mediterranean. And I do this as part of my tour of the Forum Romanum. He walks down to the Forum Romanum in the middle of the night, through all the revelry. Nobody knows he's been made the emperor, probably just with 2 or 3 bodyguards. Latus, the Praetorian prefect's gone to prepare things in the Praetorian camp because he needs their support. The court chamberlain's gone to prepare the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. So he's basically on his own, effectively. Walks down to the Senate house and sends word for the senators to come and see him and acclaim him in the early morning in the Senate house, the Curia, which is at the head of the Forum Romanum. And then he tries to go into the Senate house to get things ready, and it's locked. Just been made the emperor. You can't get in the Senate because it's locked. Not only that, the bailiff with the keys is out on the lash because it's New Year's Eve. So they can't find him. So he basically goes to the temple next door, the Temple of Concord, in the middle of the night, just with some street lights or whatever, torches here and there, sits on his own on the steps for about 4 hours. The most powerful man in his known world can't get into the Senate house because it's locked and the bailiff's enjoying New Year's Eve. So he sits on the steps of the Temple of Concord to wait for the keys to arrive 4 hours later. Oh,
if you're not friends with the maintenance guy, you know, it's all over. And before I go to Chris for the next question, I just want to say one of the things that scene really reminded me of, and I guess maybe this is a deep dive into Civil War history, but when General George Meade is appointed to head the Union Army, it's in 1863 during the middle of the Civil War, the American Civil War. It's a very similar scene. Someone comes into his tent and he believes that he is being arrested, that he's being put under arrest by Congress and being dragged away. And they're like, no, we want you to...
Even worse.
Yeah, right. Even worse, you're in charge.
Right. So you know, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
So Simon, he eventually, gets the key, so to speak. He's made emperor, and I don't want to get into what happens to him quite yet, but he's emperor for a very short period of time. What, if anything, is he able to accomplish as emperor, and does he enact anything or do anything that either A, stands out, or B, lasts beyond him? Effectively,
what he does is he has a very, very populist agenda. He's very, very aware of his own roots. He's aware of the unfairness of aspects of Roman society. Certainly aware of the huge disparity in the distribution of wealth in the Roman Empire. Between most of the wealth in the empire is in the hands of probably 0.001% of society. So what he does is he has this very populist program of selling unused publicly owned land at cheap prices to those from the normal citizenry who would wish to farm it, because the land's going unused. So that's very popular. He literally physically walks into the imperial treasury to find it empty. So you can imagine that this is like Smaug's lair at the beginning of the third movie, The Hobbit, or in the book about halfway through The Hobbit, and is expecting it to be stacked with gold to the rafters, and it's not. It's bare because Commodus has spent everything on lavish entertainment. Wow. So he has a fire sale. Basically, he turfs everything out the Palatine Hill Palace that Commodus bought and has a fire sale. Literally, sells his slaves. Okay, he makes redundant any of Commodus's freed men or free men who he's got no use for. He sells all of Commodus's clothes. So there's a very vivid description in Dio about these amazing outfits that Commodus had bought. You know, there's green velvet, there's a gladiator outfit and all this, and he sells all that. He sells Commodus's collection, get this, of specifically built mechanical coaches. So in these coaches, Commodus would have sat on a seat which would have followed the sun around as he traveled, sort of a mechanical device, that kind of thing. So basically he partially refills the fiscus treasury, and that's where his downfall comes from, because he's unwilling to spend money when he doesn't think it's necessary.
And so then he runs afoul of the Praetorian Guard. And I mean, that's a phrase that we all have heard, the Praetorian Guard. It's usually used metaphorically to describe people close to power or the attendants of the president or prime minister. But what does it mean? What is the Praetorian Guard, and how does he run afoul of them?
I certainly wouldn't have a Praetorian Guard.
I know that behind that door, who knows what is there? In fact, behind your shoulder, I think you do have a Praetorian Guard right there.
No, it's actually Hector the Golden Doodle. There he is.
Oh,
hey, Hector.
There he is. That's my Praetorian Guard. So the Praetorian Guard are literally it's the Imperial Guard, which is a formalization of the close bodyguards which a Republican military leader would have had. Caesar's 10th Legion, for example, could be called a sort of a proto-Praetorian Guard because that was effectively his personal legion. Very big though it was. The Praetorian Guard into the Imperial period, the Principate Empire, half the time is good and half the time is bad. If it's good, they're elite soldiery. So Praetorian Guards accompany Trajan on his conquests in Dacia and in the east. If they're bad, they kill the emperor. Pertinax is the best example of it. And in fact, actually, I mean, when we talk about what happens after Pertinax's death, bring me on to what Severus does to the Praetorian Guard. But to give you a sense, it's really easy to give you a sense of what happens to Pertinax with the Guard. They want some money. He agrees to give them a donative, so a bribe, to cement the fact that he's become the emperor. So their boss, the prefect Laetus, makes him the emperor. Then after the event, Laetus thinks, oh, hold on a minute, I better go and ask the guards if they agree as well. And they do agree, but they're a little bit wary of Pertinax. They're wary because he is a very worthy individual and a gifted and brave soldier who is famous for it, and they're not, because the Praetorian Guard of the time of Commodus were basically sort of living the good life in Rome. So they're wary of him, and actually Pertinax, in a speech to them to say thank you, uses military phrases which to them are very jarring, because it shows that he's the real deal, and it's basically saying they're not. I don't think he's meaning to do so, but that's how they take it. So they get off to a bad start. And Pertinax clearly thinks that he's got the wherewithal to manage this. So he agrees to pay them a partial sum of the one they want. And he may have paid it or may not, but he certainly doesn't pay him all they want. So at the end of month 1, end of January, they come and see him. They say, can you pay us some money? And he says, no. I'm a worthy emperor. We're bust. I'll see what I can do later, but no. At the end of month 2, this is when he's beginning his program of reforms and the public love him. They come and see him and they say, we really, really want that money. And he says, no. And they say, well, if you don't, we're going to kill you. And he still says, no, because I'm styling myself on the very worthy Marcus Aurelius, the great philosopher emperor. And they go away and he thinks he's dealt with it. And then at the end of month 3, they come back. But when they come back, it's really interesting because we get some major, it's the last few months of his life, we get real detail, which actually would make an amazing movie, actually. Because the Praetorian, the way it's described, the Praetorian unit, which goes down to talk to him in month 3 from the Praetorian camp, which is outside the walls of Rome, by the way, are in full armor. And they're not meant to be in armor, and they're not meant to wear weapons in Rome. But they're in full armor, they're kitted up, they're tooled up. What's more, they're in a military formation. They're described as being in a coenus, which means swine head, which is the battle line piercing formation that legionaries and auxiliaries use in battle against other heavy infantry. So you have the leading centurion on the apex, and then like that, punch through. And I think what's been described here is the legionaries having to force their way through the crowds in Rome who are fans of Pertinax, because they know that there's something afoot, because the Praetorians aren't meant to wear armor and weapons in Rome. And they arrive in the Forum Romanum, they climb up the hill, which is steep, as you all know, to the Palatine Hill, to the Imperial Palace. And they're admitted into the palace by the freedmen of Commodus, now serving Pertinax, because the freedmen of Commodus think that they're going to get made redundant too. So they want to get rid of Pertinax. So they're let in. Now Pertinax sees them and goes to speak to them. And he's got his own close bodyguard of Germans, doesn't call them. There's also a counterbalancing bodyguard unit of cavalry to counterbalance the Praetorian Guard, doesn't call those either. He could have called the cohort urbani, who are the gendarmes in Rome, doesn't call those either. He thinks he can face them down. And he stands up to them. It's probably about 40 or 50. And he faces up to them and he wins them over. He shames them effectively, except one guy. Right at the end, the guy stabs him with a spear. And then after that, everybody else joins in. And I think that this is the guy that's been nominated by whoever is organising the plot to make sure that if everything else fails, this time he's got to go. He's got to go. And he's dead 3 months in for being a worthy guy. Now, the criticism he has later in other historical interpretations is that he's too worthy and is lacking in common sense, because there's no way on earth that the emperor of the Roman Empire, who in his world is the most important man on the planet, in his world, should be going to face anybody without a close bodyguard at least. And the close bodyguard would have been much better warriors, certainly, than that generation of Praetorian guards.
So he's got this incredible life. He kind of gets to the top of the greasy pole, and it's amazing how quickly it all just stops. I mean, his rise is incredible, and then just bam.
Chris is buried that night. He's buried that night. He's actually buried in a family mausoleum that night. So he goes from breathing, being the most important man in the world, to having his corpse chucked into the corner of a family tomb where they weren't expecting him to be buried. He should have been buried in a fine tomb somewhere.
So,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to. So now, what happens then? So, the chaos again. We're minus an emperor again. Kind of quickly, I guess. What happens to Rome, and what happens to him?
The Praetorian Guard have a very low point then, the low point than assassinating the emperor, the guy they're meant to protect, because they auction the throne. They auction the emperor's clothes, as it were, and they do it from the Praetorian camp. And the two individuals who are bidding are the person who has taken over from Pertinax as the city prefect, his father-in-law. Pertinax's father-in-law is bidding his son-in-law's throne. Now his son-in-law's dead, which is a bit harsh. And also a very, very dodgy senator called Didius Julianus. And Didius Julianus basically gives the Praetorian Guard all the money they want. Didius Julianus then becomes the emperor, even more briefly than Pertinax. Severus, at the time, Septimius Severus, is a great warrior emperor when he becomes the emperor. He's a great warrior. Also fought in the Marcomannic Wars with Maximus and with Pertinax. He's on the Danube with 5 crack legions, so he's in the charge of the most elite units of the Roman military, and he drops like a sword of Damocles down to the Forum Romanum. A month later, he's there, bivouacked in the Forum Romanum, walks into the Senate House, point of a sword, I'm the boss. Didius Julianus is dead. Severus is then the emperor from AD 193 to AD 211, when he dies in York, actually. And Severus is the guy who deifies Pertinax. And is it okay, Ricky, if I just mention how that takes place, because it's a beautiful story.
Sure.
Beautiful story. The so towards the end of the year, Severus wants to give a fitting burial to his mentoree Pertinax. Clearly, he can't bury him because he's buried already. He's been putrefying for because he clearly wasn't embalmed if he was buried the night he was killed. So he's been putrefying for months. So there's nothing there to bury really. So what they do is they have a state funeral, which begins with 5 days of fighting and etc. in the Colosseum, then parades of the military through the Forum Romanum to the camps of the Fields of Mars, and then there's a ceremony where you end up with sort of rows of seating. All the senators are there, huge funeral pyre, and on top of the funeral pyre is the body of Pertinax, except it's not; it's a wax effigy. So there's this lifelike wax effigy of Pertinax atop this funeral pyre, above which sits a cage with an eagle in it, a live eagle. And what happens is Severus performs the rites, sets fire to the funeral pyre, the flames lick higher. Just at the point when the eagle's getting a bit worried, they open the cage and the eagle flies away to heaven. And that's Pertinax's soul being deified, going to heaven.
I can't even believe that we managed to get this whole life into this hour. But Simon Elliot, what a great introduction to the Super Bowl today. So no, it was fabulous to hear from you about Pertinax, and your passion and enthusiasm are definitely contagious. And we should mention one more time that your book, which you've waved at us a few times, is Pertinax, the son of a slave who became Roman emperor. And Simon Elliot, next time we want to talk about Rome, we want you to come back and talk to us about it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you guys. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. It was enjoyable.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Simon. Good luck.
Be well.
May you have good dice rolls.
Yeah.
Well, and we didn't even get to ask him about Indiana Jones, but we'll have to save that for another time. Indiana Jones, the worst archaeologist of all time. But next week, Chris, I just want to mention before we go, we're running a little bit over, that we have a very interesting show. We're going to talk to author Philippe Sands about his new book, Ratline: The Exalted Life and Mysterious Death of a Nazi fugitive Nazi. And what it really is kind of an uncomfortably close-up portrait of a high-ranking Nazi official in occupied Poland who's indicted for war crimes but escapes, at least for a while. Sort of. So, I think maybe it's worth mentioning that the author, Philippe Sands, was a friend of Jean Le Carré, who recently passed away. And Jean Le Carré saw this book before he died and called it hypnotic, shocking, and unput-downable, which is good because we have to both read it this week. So I think that's a real positive recommendation.
Yes, it is.
So I think that. What do you think? Does that wrap up another happy hour?
I'm empty, so yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Stay safe.